Terrarian in the Dungeon, Chapter 11, Fan Fiction by Azazyel. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel for listening and patreon.com/Azazyel to read all of his stories. The last little addition to my new dungeon kit was a mana flower. It was an accessory that reduced the mana I used by some 7%, and minorly increased my mana regeneration, and more importantly, it was literally the easiest thing I've made period. All I had to do was coat a desert flower with my mana to make a nature's gift, and then stick the nature's gift into a mana potion, and then it became an accessory. I could then slot it into my inventory section of the accessory. After making the mana flower, I also made the space gun, a comically looking alien gun even with little circles of metal around the barrel that would shoot little lasers that were more condensed than my aquamarine staff's magical bolts but obviously did less surface widespread damage on a foe, with also having a slightly slower firing speed. With my summons already being unsummoned and ready for their next battle, I entered the dungeon, and this time I just kept following the group of morning shift adventurers as they all made their way down, deeper into the dungeon, and with such a line of adventurers the dungeon didn't even bother trying to throw a monster party or whatever at us. Because any monsters that popped up were just instantly killed by the line's archers or spellcasters. And this line of adventurers basically stuck together until we all reached the 9th floor, which was when I decided to peel off to start fighting the stronger variants of goblins, kobold, and all the new monsters that started to appear. Which included the likes of war shadows, killer ants, bad bat slimes, dungeon lizards, purple moths, blue papilio, frog shooters, and lastly the newly found bane of my existence in needle rabbits. Needle rabbits were a sign that the many gods in this world hated us mortals. They were normal-sized rabbits that could leap at insane speeds and would shove their sharp-as-hell needle horn that was atop their heads into you. Their insane speed and lethal horn that easily could pierce through leather and chainmail armor made it one of the leading causes of early adventure deaths, other than war shadows assassinating an adventurer. The way the dungeon's layout at the 8th and above changed to mostly large rooms with short corridors between the rooms did, however, make my life easier, as I was more easily able to abuse my newly made aquamarine staff, as not even aberrant killer ants with their stupidly thick exoskeleton could withstand a dozen bolts of magical crashing into their frames. "I need to make you an infinite grenade pouch," I muttered as I checked Sir Fluffykins the First's little bag of grenades I gave him and saw how many were left. But while I was on the 9th floor, I was paying more attention to the dungeon itself, and by looking at the map I picked up from one of the stalls outside the dungeon that a retired adventurer was selling that had lost his legs. I decided to test the wolfram pickaxe I made to see if my Terraria mining bullshit could allow me to bypass floors altogether, as the staircases made the distance between floors at like some 50 meters deep, at least up here in the first 10 floors. Well, actually I was going to pick up some dungeon ores, and the act of doing so would ring the metaphorical dinner bell. But I was broke financially, and if I wanted to make any more accessories I needed or that didn't cost me a dime, as Seshet had cut me off from her stores. "You guys keep watch, I am going to work," I ordered my wolfram drone, and Sir Fluffykins the First, who saluted in the squirrel's case with an acorn at the ready at the side, while the drone beeped loudly and then did a backflip in the air. To show its enthusiasm, I guess. I can't even understand girls. How can I ever hope to understand a sentient drone that gets its jollies off by ripping monster flesh off so it can extract its valuable organs? Thus, with my summons keeping watch for me, I began mining the off-colored stone walls that had the dungeon ores. And as my wolfram pickaxe bit into the walls several times and did all of jack after half a dozen blows, a perfectly square meter-wide hole appeared in front of me, with my inventory receiving some titanium ore. But my act of ripping a chunk out of the very alive dungeon didn't go unpunished, as throughout the room I was in, the walls of the room loudly crackled, and from the wall's surface came monsters of all shapes and mutation levels. The dungeon is being a big baby bitch at only getting some skin taken off. I cursed seeing the crowd of war shadows, with even an aberrant leading the posse of a dozen or so. Not to mention the crowd of frog shooters and literally all the other monsters that could spawn on these damned floors. "Fuck you guys, I am going home," I said, flipping them off, and instead of literally teleporting home, I simply hurried up my mining, with my summons overworking themselves and explosions ringing out behind me as Sir Fluffykins the First gleefully began taking this as an opportunity to begin chucking grenades fucking everywhere. But as soon as I hollowed out a little tunnel that was like 4 meters into the dungeon's walls and made a whole meter little room at the end of the tunnel, I resummoned both Sir Fluffykins the First and the wolfram controller in front of the little tunnel I dug out and laid new stone upon to hopefully keep the dungeon from regenerating it. "Come into my parlor, little darlings." I taunted the dungeon, and it answered with a cacophony of howling filled with murderous rage as the monsters outside my little tunnel tore each apart to push themselves into the meter-wide entranceway. And I gleefully allowed them. Until they almost reached my little room, and as the much stronger aberrant goblin tried to tear my face off, it was met with a torrent of blue magical bolts from my aquamarine staff and the laser bolts from my wolfram drone. So, I had the tightest killing field literally possible, and I had somehow pissed the dungeon off so much, that even the normally cowardly blue papillo butterflies that would typically fly at the roof of the 10 or so meter tall dungeon rooms, and would just heal the monsters actually attempting to push into the tunnel in order to batter me with their wings. Which I happily allowed. Because literally the blue papillo butterflies' healing was indiscriminate, and I wanted to see if I could tame damagey monsters without a taming skill coming off my fauna. Granted, I wasn't brave enough to try to screw the dungeon monsters like that one guy I read about in another damagey FIC to tame them. But harpy feathers are stupidly expensive, so I would like a mount or something to carry me around the dungeon, as running around for hours on end was tiring. So, with the blue papillo monster having only a healing ability and just generally being super fragile, I wanted to see if I could tame it rather than trying to bully a kobold or goblin into being tamed and removing its connection with the dungeon. When I ran low on mana, I quickly chugged a mana potion and then switched to my copper bow and shot some jester arrows that conceptually didn't give a shit about whatever foe it hit, as they would only stop when it hit a wall, or in other words, it would shoot through the entire horde and would only stop when they collided with the room's opposite wall. Hell, the arrows weren't even affected by gravity, so they could technically fly forever due to me making them with pieces of the last mana crystal I saved last night, so they had a bunch of astral mana affecting them. But after I shot a dozen arrows over the course of a couple of minutes, I switched to my space gun, and with the insane mana cost reductions I had stacked with my meteor armor set, helmet, and the mana flower accessory, I was barely using more mana than I could regenerate passively when I carefully measured the amount I was shooting. My cheesing method of killing the monsters truly paid dividends, as I killed at most 3 or 4 dozen monsters without getting a single damn scratch on me and having incurred no costs other than the grenade Sir Fluffykins the first threw to give me enough time to mine out a little room and fill it with stone. With the monsters all dead and in a gory mess on the ground, I decided to take a minute to practice the whole stone placement technique, as the Terraria style stone I had in my hand was a cube about the same size as a Rubik's cube on all its sides, but once I went to place it against a wall or on the ground it would become a full meter square. Should I make a house and just torture the monsters? I verbally pondered and then recalled how the monsters and dungeon didn't damage the stone I lined the little tunnel and room I made. I decided that yes, making my own little safe houses and even for other adventures could be nice. Eventually anyway. For now, I don't have the mechanical accessories that will allow me to make traps/teleporters and all kinds of goodies. Plus, I want the guild and other familia to pay and protect me while I build, as the dungeon very obviously doesn't like my Terraria bullshit mining. Maybe I should open up to the Loki or Ganesha familia about my building abilities and have a party of high-level adventurers escort me in the dungeon, setting up safe houses and stuff in the dungeon that cannot be destroyed except by my pickaxes in particular. It's not like I could summon a Terraria boss and kill it on my lonesome with it not attracting every damn adventurer in the next 3 floors in each direction.